Warning, this content may be upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. Truckers and long-distance drivers of Reddit, what are some of your spookiest/unexplained stories of the road? I was driving a shortcut from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms is located in the desolate high desert east of LA. The shortcut was all two-lane road through total nothingness, except for passing through Amboy, California. It was also, at the time, a hotspot for satanic group activity, so I was driving by myself in the afternoon. I stopped in Amboy and snapped a picture of the city sign, just to prove I was there to friends who dared me to take that route to I-40. I got back in my car and proceeded to drive up into the mountain range between Amboy and I-40. Once I reached the top, I am driving north through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead I see some stuff in the middle of the road. I stop 100 feet or so away and the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Being a Marine, I reach under the seat and pull out a 9mm pistol and chamber a round. Something seemed very wrong. It looked too perfect, as if it were staged. An ambush? Was I being paranoid? Something was just wrong. As I scanned the road I saw a line I could drive past the guy in the road on his left, swerve to the right side of a woman, behind the Fiero, and I'd be on the other side. I was the passenger for this, but on a long drive I accompanied my mom on. We saw a man standing on the concrete divider at about 10 p.m. It was fall, so it was dark out, and pouring rain. He was dressed as a jester, and it was on a stretch of poorly lit highway. She pulled over because she was freaking out so bad, and he started doing weird stuff, cartwheels and handstands and shit. Weirdest thing ever. One Sunday afternoon, I was jogging along a quiet country road, and it was starting to snow. A Ford Bronco pulling a horse trailer slows down next to me, and the driver asks, "Are you cold?" I say no, because even though I'm cold, you should never show weakness to a stranger. Upon being chided to quit complaining, 3 of them stick their tongues out at him, and one starts crying. The seats in the car were all empty, and to this day I wonder what the backstory was behind that horse trailer incident. Edit, spelling. Just a couple of months ago I worked a pretty late shift one night. Left the office around 2 a.m. and have a 30-minute drive home. I live pretty far out in the woodland areas of the country. Forest directly on both sides of the road. I slammed on my brakes and swerved to miss because I thought for sure a kid was bound to be chasing behind it. Never seen a soul step out. As I drive on by and started thinking, what would a kid be doing out playing this late? Then I remembered, there were no houses around where this happened at. The height it came onto the road at and the way it bounced the wind simply didn't blow it in front of me. It was pretty creepy. I was once driving late night from San Antonio to Houston down I-10, probably about midnight. Along this road there is an access road that runs mostly parallel to the interstate, and veers off at an overpass every now and then. When the road veers off, the overpass, which is usually tall enough to let the tractor trailers through, has a pretty steep incline of dirt and concrete forming the hill. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I'm driving down the road sort of caravanning with my friend, except he was about 10 miles back because he stopped at Buc-ee's to get gas, so he was far behind me. At first, I am sort of worried because I think it's a cop. I had a gram with me but hadn't gotten a chance to smoke yet. At one point, the car once again veers off and then back parallel with me until he just takes off, going well over 100 miles per hour I'm sure, because I was already going around 75 to 80 miles per hour. An overpass was coming and I expected him to veer off again, except he didn't. I was still behind him, so I lost sight of him on the other side because I hadn't passed under the overpass yet. But, when I did pass under, I didn't see anything. Nothing at all. No wreckage, no fire, no trees, bushes, ditches, nothing. It was like it hadn't happened. Weirdest thing I ever saw. But the weirder part is my friend told me he saw the same car doing the same thing when he got to that stretch of the road, only he never saw the car commit suicide like I did. I was driving cross-country on my way home to Maine. I'd had enough interstate driving and decided to take back roads the rest of the way home when I got to New Hampshire, so I'm way out in the boondocks past the White Mountains when I see the most effed up and hilarious thing of my whole life. Up ahead was a small human on a shitty old tricycle, weaving back and forth on the road. It was what appeared to be a midget, had a beard, was dressed like an elf in medieval-type clothes and a pointy hat. He was wearing dark glasses and was tapping along the road with a long wooden stick. So yeah, it was apparently a blind gnome on a tricycle. I had been driving all day but didn't feel tired at all. I think it was just some midget with an awesome sense of humor out F-king with people. Or maybe he was crazy, I don't know. Back in the early/mid 1970s, my mother and I lived in the Pacific Northwest. I was about 6 years old. We were on an offbeat road right out of Seattle. Very dark night, no moon and a wisp of fog. We saw a Volkswagen Beetle on the side of the road with their emergency flashers on and a rather good-looking guy, as my mom describes him, with his arm in a sling waving us down. My mom pulled over, being the kind of woman that would help anybody in need, and he looked normal. Mom rolled down her window and asked if she could help, and the guy asked my mom if she could help him get the last lug nut off his tire so he could change his flat. My mom said something about his smile really made her uncomfortable, and then she noticed that he was missing the passenger seat in his Beetle, so she rolls the window back up and said she would call a tow truck to come help him at the next city. Then speeds away. While looking in her rearview mirror, she sees him taking off the sling and getting back in the Beetle, and took off very fast in the opposite direction. So that's the night. At 6 years old, I shook the hand of Ted Bundy. Not spooky. Unexplained definitely. I worked as a trucker for a year or so, and had some weird experiences. I'm probably late to this thread, but FCK it. One of the strangest things I saw was just off the Trans-Canada in BC. It was surprisingly dead on the road I was on, nobody going either direction, which was weird, even for a Wednesday in the wee hours of the morning. I found a corner and see a pillar of smoke. I start to slow down since it's kind of a blind corner, and see that there is only one car off the ditch, fire blazing. I pull off the road to see if anyone is injured and can't see anyone. On the other side of the clearing is, no joke, 4 or 5 black bears standing on their back legs. I back away back into my truck and watch as they calm down and continue to watch the fire. What the FCK happened that morning I'll never know. Bears are weird. I have a lot of weird bear stories. I don't have any. My worst experience was dead stop traffic in Des Moines, Iowa, seeing a 15-year-old kid take a dive off of a 16-foot bridge head first into the ground. That was a horrible day. Last winter I worked as a night route driver for a medical courier service. Basically, I'd drive way out to rural clinics, pick up biological samples from the Dropbox, and then drive them back into town and ship them to a lab via the 24-hour Kinkos. My route was the same 4 nights a week, but on Thursday, the 5th night of my work week, I had one additional stop, a vet's office out in the middle of f***ing nowhere. I think I'm being robbed in the middle of nowhere. My phone is in the cup holder, and I'm about to SHT my pants when this thing stops, looks over at me, and then hauls ass back into the woods at the side of the driveway. It had to have been a bear, but it ran on 2 feet. After that, I always drove my car right up to the Dropbox, so I didn't even have to get out when I made that pickup. Fuck that. I was once driving back from northern Western Australia, and at about 11 o'clock at night, and I noticed this red light off in the distance hanging just above the horizon in my side mirror. I checked it again and again for about 2 hours, and it just hung there, following us. No matter how many turns or hills we went over. I decided to stop at a rest spot for a stretch and something to eat. I pointed it out to my dad, who had woken up, and he couldn't make top or tails of it. I never did find out what it was, nor have I seen it again. I had just merged into I-25 from US 36 in Denver, and even though the speed limit is 55 miles per hour, nobody drives that slow. Because of the amount of traffic that merges on at the next on-ramp, I usually moved over one more lane. I did this as usual, and a silver Pontiac Aztek had let me into the lane. The truck then swerved to the right just in time for me to see the cars in front of him stopped. I swerved to left while still braking without looking. I missed the car in that lane, thankfully, but I looked in my mirror and saw the Pontiac Aztek had clipped one of the cars that was stopped. I called 911 and let them know of the accident, then got off the highway at 58th Avenue and came back around as a witness via the police. When I got back to the site, traffic was stopped and someone had already got out to check on people. This person was killed from head trauma when their head hit the window. If only I had not been selfish about the traffic merging ahead, this person would have had more stopping room and more distance to react. BTW, not a truck driver, but you do drive around Denver and surrounding areas all day for work. Driving through Virginia on second day of a 4-day road trip. I remarked to my family that it was odd, we hadn't seen another RV of our dated make so far this trip. 2 minutes later, one comes along going the other way. Then I said, you know, we haven't seen any deer this trip. Go around a bend and there's about 6 of them grazing in a glade by the roadside. Okay, I'm on a roll now. Okay then, we haven't seen Santa Claus on this trip. It was July. 5 minutes later, there's a billboard with Santa touting the Christmas store, so I said, we haven't seen $1 million. End of lucky streak. Frown. I have another story. Also driving through Virginia on I-81. Different year, same long route. Before I continue, you need to know that in non-Reddit life I have an unusual name that's hard to spell, and my dear husband has an amazing ability to pull into the grodiest gas stations. True to form, the one he pulled into took the cake. No name brand gas, filthy dirty, but I was ready to take what I could get, spelled correctly. Nobody, except God, apparently, ever spells it correctly. Even some family members. I took a picture. And laughed the entire rest of the trip. That God is a funny one. Not my personal experience, but my uncle lives out deep in rural Oregon. He told me this story where he was driving to work really early in the morning to a small town about 30 minutes away. There was a bit of traffic just outside of town, so he stopped behind another car, after following the car very slowly for a while the car stops once more in the traffic. My uncle sits there and waits for about 20 minutes. The car still hasn't moved. All he can see is the headlights in front of him. Eventually he gets out to see what's the matter. Inside was the dead driver. The back part of the car was completely fine and my uncle did not even know a thing was wrong earlier due to the fog. The story always unsettled me when I had to drive in fog. I was a front seat passenger on a drive from Guatemala City to the west coast of the country. In this very small town, there was a big rig pulling 2 trailers. All of a sudden the truck stops, only he didn't rush like he committed a crime, he walked as if it were just another day. I don't have a spooky story, but I did have a near-miss experience that almost made me crap myself. My dad is my co-driver and we were in Atlanta and it had rained a bit. Traffic is a bit congested but not as bad as Atlanta can get. I brake like I've never braked before. The mother effer manages to correct himself, I have no idea, and I managed to squeeze through the gap between his aft and the side of the road and avoid what could have easily been a horrible accident. He goes along like nothing happened. Then my dad, who had been sleeping, reamed me for not keeping enough of a distance to avoid needing to brake so hard, and thus waking him up, and didn't believe me when I told him the awesome scary thing I just managed to avoid. I'm probably too late for this to be seen. But here it goes. Once my friends and I were driving back from the nearest decent-sized city to our crappy little hometown in rural Tennessee. Now I had an older car, but it was in fairly good shape. No real issues aside from some carburetor problems occasionally. There were probably 4 or 5 of us in the car. We kept coming up with various combinations of blasphemous words in the same vein as the original. After a few minutes of this, suddenly all the lights in the car just cut off. Inside and outside. Nothing else was affected. Just the lights. Then just as suddenly they came back on. Obviously we chalked that up to chance. After a few minutes of nervous laughter the blasphemy resumed. Again the lights shut off. Now I was worried. I thought something was really wrong with the car. My friends accused me of turning off the lights. I hadn't and convinced them of it. Again, the lights came back on. Now I'm an atheist currently, and at the time was a pretty cynical Christian. I didn't put much faith in the thought that our banner was pissing God off, so he was sending a message. But still, sometimes you don't tempt faith, right? Well, you aren't me then. I don't remember the exact phrase, but let's assume it wasn't something you'd say to your grandmother. No sooner had the last syllable rolled off my tongue than the lights cut off for good. This time long enough to force me to pull over and turn off the car. One of my more religious friends said a little prayer in the back seat. I kept my cynical mouth shut this time. Eventually I started the car and the lights came on just like normal. We rode the rest of the way home in silence. I never had a problem with anything electrical in that car after that night. The battery even lasted a couple more years until I sold it. My friend and myself were on a road trip. Part of the road trip took us just north of San Francisco, and just south of the area where the Zodiac was supposed to live. For some reason our mapping program freaked out and took us on a long back roadway to our campsite. Sure enough, we get to talking about the Zodiac. You know, college kids trying to freak each other out. This was a long time ago, but we'd be doing the same thing if it were today. On cue we run into another car. It doesn't turn its high beams off, blinding us. I reverse to let the car pass. He drives by. It was just a harmless man with his kids in the back. But then I see a flash out of the corner of my eye. I look over at my friend to ask he saw it too, and he was open-mouthed and staring in the same direction. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.